Welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by the Bangalore International Centre. BIC has fostered over 250 informed discussions, dialogue, and cultural enterprise in its new premises since 2019. BIC Talks bring ideas and conversations ever closer to you.
Hi, I'm Pavan Srinath and welcome to the latest episode of BIC Talks. We thought about taking a break from our continuous coverage of various aspects of COVID-19 to talk about the arts, theatre, and the performing arts, film, and more. Unfortunately, we cannot fully escape the reality of COVID-19, so even our discussion around the arts, unfortunately, has to be done under the influence of everything that is happening around us. So today I'm delighted to have with me Ravichandar from BIC as always, and also actor, director and social advocate Nandita and Arundhati Nag, an actor and the founder of Ranga Shankara, one of Bangalore's most eminent institutions in the space of performing arts. Arundhati and Nandita, welcome to BIC Talks.
Hey, thanks.
So I want to start off the discussion where COVID-19 and the lockdown has been brutal for a variety of people in India, which number not in the millions, but perhaps in the hundreds of millions. Arundhati, I want to start by asking, what has the lockdown meant for people in theatre, for artists, and for people in the performing arts?
I think this is such a huge sledgehammer moment. This is a juncture in the history of the arts, in the history of culture, in the history of mankind that all of us can see. The rupture is so huge that it's going to be very difficult to measure the impact right away. And what's most important is in a country like India, the divide is not between just performing arts and non-performing arts. You have people who are not classified as performing artists, but they are actually performing artists. So you still have acrobats who live on the roadside. You still have jugglers. You have people who come and tell you your future. You have a bull that is dressed up and goes from door to door and collects alms. Or you have the odd sadhu going around with one ektara and singing Kabir songs or bhajans. Now, this is such a completely unorganized sector. To even measure what comprises culture and what comprises performing arts in a country like India is, I think, a very, very daunting task. In fact, we have had discussions in the past, sometimes Sanjana and now myself and a few others, about how do we bring all these people under some kind of a net. So as far as urban artists are concerned, urban India, the major languages and capital cities, television, everything has come to a halt, everything. So I really don't know how television is going to manage to shoot and put episodes out there. As far as theatre is concerned, Ranga Shankara is concerned, we are closed for the last 1 month and youngsters are really wondering how they're going to live. It's very difficult because for every person who becomes a star, there are 500 youngsters who are strugglers or maybe more in a city like Bombay or Delhi or Bangalore. I worry because theatre especially, does not have the Guru Shishya Parampara embedded in it, especially urban theatre. When you take a look at what is going on at Ranga Shankara, we have more than 150 theatre groups. When we started Ranga Shankara, we had only 50 theatre groups in Bangalore. In these 15 years, now you have 150 theatre groups. People engaging with the arts has become more prolific. But now all these youngsters don't know where to go, don't know what to do, don't know how to engage with the art that they had just about begun to kind of enjoy and work with. Leave aside the ones who are professionals, who are earning their livelihoods. They are completely at sea. They have no idea what's going to happen next.
Nandita, would you like to add to what Arundhati just shared? I mean, this is so vast, right? Even when sometimes we think of the performing arts, we have a fairly elite conception of it. And we look at what is basically at the very top of this pyramid, but it runs everywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, it does, but yet we are not really in the same boat. At one level, we say COVID-19 is agnostic, right? It's like it doesn't see race, region, culture, class. And yet, the fact is that the vulnerabilities aren't the same for everyone. So while I might be and you, we are all locked in our house, but just the fact that we can be locked in our house itself is a privilege, is something that we never thought of it as a privilege. And we are thinking, oh my God, we had so many other things to do and now we are locked down. And when we see the stories of the daily wagers, the migrant laborers who are wanting to go back to their homes, can neither afford to stay in a city, nor are they able to go back home. And even if they go back home, what do they go back to? So it is definitely a huge crisis that probably we haven't seen in 100 years or maybe more. And the arts and craft community is not out of it. And like Arundhati rightly said, it's such an unorganized sector. So it's from those performing on the street to the folk artists to the traditional artists in small towns, in big cities, to new urban youngsters who come to this city like Bombay or any big city to looking for their dream, and they probably have just started doing something, getting a little bit of work, and now what do? There are about 6 young people, staying in one little place, and now they don't know how to even pay their rents. So it is definitely going to impact art and craft communities. And I don't know, this whole discourse around it, the fact that art is elitist, I think it's the elite who say that probably, those who kind of create those demarcations. Art can also be elitist, but art intrinsically isn't. Art has been there since the cave men and women started painting in their caves. I think it's an instinct. It's a very primal need to express. Why does a Santal woman, why does she have to make a rangoli outside her house? Why do the bowls be carved? Why do they in a particular way? So all of that is part of that need to express, to have that sense of aesthetic that we have separated from our lives. In many ways, I think the reason why we are so connected is also through art. It's through music and poetry and reading and dance and theater and films. That's something that keeps us connected. And I grew up in an artist's home. My father is a painter. And in some sense, he was too much of a purist. He never wanted to put his paintings online. And he used to say that's so impersonal. To see a painting, you have to see it for real. You have to see it at a certain distance. You need to see the dimensions. And now you think, what happens to those who have a real relationship with the art where the digital world for them is a block? Like I remember we did some cine plays, we shot theater. And a lot of the theater practitioners in the beginning said, how can you shoot theater? That's cinema. You can't shoot a play. It's just not the same because the audience is so part of that engagement. And now suddenly you feel like, oh my God, maybe we should have really shot all our plays, because will those plays ever be done again? I mean, this is also a time to remind ourselves that maybe we need to document and we need to maybe innovate ourselves. Maybe this is a time we'll have to reinvent ourselves. Like in the film world also, a lot of people are doing now films in that lockdown space. In fact, some of the big actors have done a short film where they've kind of shot separately. Have you seen that, Arundhati?
Yeah.
And there are musicians who are singing in 10 different languages. I just got a song this morning, a tribute to the earth, and they're all singing in different ways. I mean, this is just an interim. This cannot be a long-term solution. And also this is a solution for the privileged, because what do the folk artists in different parts who are not so gadget friendly, how do they communicate? How do they monetize? The woman who's making basketry in her little village, how does she buy those supplies? How does she sell it? So it's going to take time before we even think about how to get over this. But the sooner we start putting our heads together and to see what we are going to do, because other than the health crisis, the economic crisis is going to be huge, and it's going to impact some people much more than others.
How do you see the process going forward? We will be coming out of the lockdown soon, but perhaps for many it will be difficult to get to a play, right? I mean, we might step out for essential needs, but not to go sit in a theater, watch a movie, or do something where also there is the fear that there'll be close social contact. So there are some examples, I think, from London and elsewhere where theaters are sort of running performances to a zero audience, but filming it and putting it up online. Do you see some such things happening in India, or that will happen soon?
A lot of people are actually sharing their archives from MoMA in New York, from Museum of Modern Art. NCP is doing all their live shows. A lot of people are actually also being generous and sharing their libraries, their archives for people to watch. But, human contact, that is what, in a way, we are made of. And for us to reinvent ourselves and think of it as a digital contact, this is going to be for at least another 6 months, and the impact of it is going to last probably another 2 years at the very least. We will definitely have to think of more ways. And some of us who are, I think, a little more privileged, we need to also use this time to create. Even to create art takes time. This is also a time to reflect and to create and to write and to do all of that, but also to care for the larger art and craft community and see what we can do to make it sustainable for them.
I think I shared a very nice conversation with Ravichandar a couple of days ago, and Ravi was saying something very interesting, that people would have realized the value of social time by the time the lockout is over. And people have already realized that they don't need to go 100 days of the year to work, don't need to go to the office. People can work from home. So this time, social time, is going to become the most precious commodity, because it's all about human beings meeting one another, seeing one another, and interacting with one another. So people will actually prioritize their time, and performance art will become one of the priorities. That was a very, very positive way of looking at this kind of a situation where people will actually prioritize.
No, we will need that human touch, the human connection, the smile, and I think we will maybe value it more. And I think what would be really interesting to see that where are we after, let's say, 4 or 5 years? Would we have really learned our lesson? Whether it is about what nature is trying to teach us, whether it is how we can work and consume less, how we appreciate, whether it's the arts or human contact. Are we going to be any different, or are we just going to go back to our old ways and say, oh God, that was a nightmare and now we are out of it and let's just go back to being greedy and back to being whatever we were?
Any thoughts on forms of art that can become more popular in sort of the COVID and the post-COVID era? I'm thinking back 100 years ago, at least in Britain and many parts of the world, radio plays were huge. Like one of the greatest comedians of all time, Peter Sellers, started off as a voice actor doing radio plays and skits that were hilarious, and then eventually became the movie star that we know of.
See, listening is a very big quality that we need to inculcate, because I think we really stopped listening to people. Having the podcast and sound becoming an easier communication tool is great, but it cannot become a replacement. See now, Ranga Shankara, the moment this lockdown happened, you had on March 27th, you had World Theatre Day. And suddenly we were face to face with this unprecedented lockdown. Normally on World Theatre Day, you would have a show at the place and you're wishing everybody. So very, very quickly, we got in touch with the theatre community and said, okay, guys, record a soliloquy or a small monologue and send it to us and we will put it on YouTube. This was like an instant reaction, and it worked, because otherwise the theatre community does work in silos. Don't have a union, for example. Theatre people do not have a union. Like Equity in England, we do not have a union that would protect our artists. We don't have anything that brings just theatre people together. We don't have the creative communities meeting one another. So either you're part of a clique and you meet, or you don't. We realized that in 15 years, of course, Ranga Shankara is a little different because we do have festivals and we really are about bringing the community together. It's not about producing our own plays. We bring the whole theatre community of the country over here to our theatre. But actually linking up with actors and putting them out there was something we realized only in the spur of the moment. And now we know that this is going to become one of our very big responsibilities, is actually bringing the community, the creative community together.
I just wanted to add that just as, when social media came and with all its evils, the young talents who started, who had a voice, like for instance, even TikTok, that many of us probably don't even use as much. And they have, they perform, they do all kinds of things. They create voices, they create characters, ideas, there's humor coming out. So maybe with this lockdown, maybe there are a lot of young people, a lot of others who are using this space to express themselves. And maybe you and I don't know enough of it. Like, I'm not so much into social media and all of that, but I'm sure that large democratic spaces also for people to express and show their talent. And if way to kind of get some of these gems, maybe new actors will be born, maybe new writers, new directors and new stand-up comedians, and who knows what will come out of this. Because human beings are so resilient, we always find ways to keep at it and reinventing ourselves. Like many countries in Europe, their governments do a lot more for art, like even for cinema, just supporting good cinema. In a country like ours, where mainstream cinema really has grabbed much of the landscape, there are very few films that are truly independent. And we used to have NFDC, which was far more active, and this was all pre-social media period, etc. But we don't really have institutions and bodies that are encouraging the expansion of art that allows you without the pressures of the economic. And I find it in our country, and probably it's true of the world, that economics interferes a lot with the arts.
Sometimes the world continues to work the way it does. I think patronage has always been important for the art, whoever be the patron, right? Whether it be the person who buys a ticket, whether it's someone who does philanthropy, whether it's the government, a king or somebody else. Can you tell us about fundraising in the best of times before we come to these worst of times?
I mean, I've had many conversations with, in fact, Ravi as well, because there's an arts center in Orissa that my father started with a huge collection of folk, traditional, modern art. And it's kind of a unique center where all of this would exist simultaneously, because the whole idea was not to have these walls between modern and traditional and folk art, to be able to look at art differently. And even in the best of times, it's been very difficult because people say, why don't you make it in Delhi, Bombay? We'd still fund it. Who's going to go to Odisha? But then you don't want all great art institutions only in the big metros. So in these times, it's such a challenge because we separate science from art, we separate body from mind, we separate, art from other issues. We have never seen it as a holistic thing. We don't realize that when we appreciate a basket or a dhokra or a lacquer toy, or we wear a woven sari, it's very deeply also connected to those communities. It's also an issue of livelihood. So we haven't valued our traditional and folk and tribal art enough. So I don't think it should be seen as separate, but you're right. It's going to be even more challenging to raise funds for art institutions, for artists, for art communities, for objects of art. It's not going to be a priority. And here we are talking about things with nuances, but when you go to funders, what is your spreadsheet looking like? What is your PPT looking like is going to be your entry point. So it is definitely going to be harder.
I come from the amateur theatre movement of India. When I began with IPTA, the Indian People's Theatre Association, and it was not a professional theatre group. It was an amateur theatre group. So people who worked in banks, worked in factories, and gave of their free time to create theatre. So that kind of theatre, that's again a part of the unorganized sector. In fact, 90% of the shows that are performed at Ranga Shankara have the amateur theatre groups performing. They don't earn their livelihoods from this. This has already cracked its livelihood issue. It's working somewhere and doing this just for the passion of being engaged in the performing arts. This is one very big sector, actually. If you look at the theatre that is happening all over the country, whether it is the Bhand or whether it is the Yakshagana, whether it is so many other people, they have seemed to have actually cracked their financials better than the urban artists.
Just to share a little bit of experience in fundraising during the BIC project. When we tried to raise money for a building project, and I'm sure, Aru, you felt the same thing during building of Ranga Shankara, we had philanthropists who said, we will fund programs, but we don't fund infrastructure. Then I have to make the case that sans the infrastructure, there is no programs. So you need a space which can house these activities. It is a difficult sell, but what we noticed that if you stay with a consistent story as to why the point that Nandita made, that there's a value proposition that you have, which you have thought through end to end, then you find people who are willing to give only programmatic support coming around and saying, okay, we will also fund the building because we see the logic of it. Just to share another experience, there was a day-long seminar of billionaire philanthropists, which was held about 4 or 5 months ago. 3 of us in Bangalore, we got 3 minutes each in a whole day's seminar. So totally 12 minutes between the 3 of us as to why should they fund arts and culture. In the limited time we had collectively, the only thing that we said, and we tried to explain, while we need to do poverty, healthcare, and education, that arts and culture are equally important. There's a livelihood story. There is this whole thing of tradition, heritage, and art forms and skills which we need to inculcate. But finally, the group agreed that arts and culture needs to be part of the entire portfolio of investments. The question is what percentage will go to arts and culture is a matter of detail. But I got a sense the group was willing to fund it as part of their overall portfolio. Have you experienced anything like this, Arundhati or Nandita?
I made a pitch saying that, having built a place like Ranga Shankara, I studied its own financials, how it runs. It's a not-for-profit trust. I feel that India needs to have more such theatres. It's not about only Bangalore being the recipient of a theatre like this. Smaller towns, B towns, is where I would like to actually have a network of theatres. Because if we are talking livelihoods and sustainability for these urban artists, we have to touch the rest of India. Just a city like Bangalore is not going to create the hawa. We have to make it possible for a boy living in a small place like Cuttack to watch a play directed by Royston Abel or directed by Feroz Khan or whoever else. The best theatre from the whole world should be going to smaller towns. It shouldn't become something that a boy who lives in Kota, for instance, which is giving you all your IAS officers. But there is no culture, there is no cultural program for Kota, because it doesn't even have a theatre space where you can do good performances. So I did kind of bat for something like this at that meeting of the well-heeled of the country and said, you guys know how this nation works. And you would understand it probably when I say that you need a grid, a north, south, east, west grid, and India to have multiples of 4 theatres. Give me just X amount of money to build 4 theatres. In 3 years, I will build the theatres, I will train the technicians, and you will have livelihoods immediately in 3 years' time. But I don't think I pushed hard, and I don't think they understood what I was saying.
And that's a good point, Aru, because just like, MS Dhoni can come from Ranchi to be an All India cricket player of some significance, why shouldn't our small towns also be recipient of the best and brightest in arts and culture? Nandita, you have tried to raise money. What's been your experience, and where have you been successful and where have you had pushbacks?
I mean, I've been successful with individuals like yourself, who one doesn't have to explain too much because you intrinsically care and you can see that vision, But for a big institution, there are 2 ways. Either it's the government or big corporations. And they all have priorities. I mean, any philanthropist is already doing what they're doing. And a lot of the time, they want their name or they want, what are we getting in return? And if the visibility, like Arundhati was saying, in smaller towns, the visibility obviously is going to be lesser. So if the visibility is less, they're like, oh, it's Odisha. I mean, I can tell you the combination of art and Odisha has been a big block. People have said, okay, can't you just do it in Calcutta? And my father said, I'm from Odisha. Odisha is rich in art and culture. And why should there not be a state-of-the-art museum? I mean, it's been planned, and the chief architect is B.V. Doshi, the Pritzker Prize winner. So one of the greatest architects has done it. It's got a fantastic collection that he's completely donating. So it's all for free that you're going to get this art center. And yet we have found it very difficult. But to be able to see that vision, I think we also need business people who have managerial business sense, but also have this heart for art, where they can help us, quote unquote, package it. Because we as artists, we don't really know how to sell it, how to sell the idea, how to get these donors. You need those interim people. You need someone who's going to handhold you a little bit and speak the language that the donors understand, which we don't know.
If I may also come in here, when it comes to funding, I think the Indian state is, while there might be a little bit of money here and there for the arts, I feel like we are not sophisticated enough state yet where, you can fund the arts, but yet be open to art, which is wildly critical of the state or quite critical of society and other things. So in that sense, I'm quite wary when we look to the government for funding for some of these things, although there have been many, many instances where they have defied this norm and actually done a lot out of goodwill and without editorial interference of any sort. To me, philanthropy, the experiences that you shared are so infuriating because we already have so much government money going down certain places, and we know why it's not making enough of a difference to various development needs. The philanthropic capital that is available is significantly smaller in number. And if CSR and philanthropy goes in the same direction and in similar ways, then to me, the return from it is actually minimal. We see very little going towards institutions, towards libraries, towards theaters, towards performing arts, things that the state is not good at funding. But I'm hoping that eventually people realize that this is needed.
If we want to build a responsible citizenry, India will have to look at investing in the arts and making institutions. It's not the government's job. Like Ranga Shankara, the land is a civic amenity site, which was made available to us at a very, very nominal rate. And we have built the theatre on a site like that. I think Karnataka is the only state where you have this provision of civic amenity sites being given to trusts. So the government should actually become the enabler and not the agency that runs cultural organizations, because that is when you have nepotism, that is when you have mediocre people coming in. I think recognizing excellence and being the enabler should become the job of the government, and also the philanthropy. Even philanthropy needs to know that they are just here for a short time. All of us, we are transient, and so is art. And the art is so delicate that if we don't capture and preserve what we have, we're going to lose it forever now. I remember one government undersecretary saying it so nicely. He was a good guy and he could communicate, saying to a whole bunch of us theatre and dance and music kind of people, I think it was a Sangeet Natak Academy meeting. When he said in his speech, he said, I want to thank all of you for being here. And I want you to remember that the government is not doing you a favor. So please ask when you want something. Because the government or even a business house with any amount of money cannot create on its own what you create. And I think this is one thing that people need. The money people and the enablers need to realize that you just have to make the atmosphere conducive with your money, with your attitude. Make it conducive for art to happen. The times that you live in will change. We are all here to make those changes.
But I think fundamentally, when art is always seen as a co-curricular thing, it's seen something as a hobby on the side in our education system. When there is really no cultural policy, when it's not seen as being important, how can we even expect it to be a priority? When the health, now with this COVID-19, it's a greater time to realize when our 1.3% is actually given to health. Imagine of our complete budget. Somebody needs to do those analysis. How much goes into defense? How much goes into education? How much goes into health? What are our priorities as a nation? And I think that's what's going to define us. So till art remains something on the sidelines, we are always going to be struggling.
I actually am optimistic about the future on a few counts. One, I think, as Nandita said, I think you're going to see more of this ISR, individual social responsibility. What can I do as an individual in the larger scheme of things? And lastly, coming to arts and culture, the point that Arundhati made earlier when we had our call, the way I see it is, what the last 4 weeks has shown, I can actually get a lot of my office stuff done using technology, online, and the like. So in the future world post-COVID, if I have only X hours for being in social gatherings, I would rather be in social gatherings with friends, batchmates, relatives, as opposed to social gatherings in the workplace. So I'm a little hopeful that people will realize what they missed, the bazaar in a certain sense. And hopefully I'm optimistic that arts and culture will come back even stronger once this whole thing is resolved. Pavan?
Nandita, Arundhati, Ravi, thank you so much for having this conversation with us on BIC Talks. There are lots of concerns going ahead for us, but I hope we will come through this stronger at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BIC Talks. You can get our podcasts on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in for new episodes every week. Check out Bangalore International Centre on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget to regularly check in on our podcasts.